Mount Nemrut, the curse of a king, WHO, wanted to sit with gods, Adiyaman, Turkey. At 2,150 meters above sea level, in the Kahta district of Adiyaman in southeastern Turkey, the wind-scoured summit of Mount Nemrut holds one of the strangest monuments left behind by the ancient world. Recognized by UNESCO and sometimes called the eighth wonder of the world, it is a remote mountaintop lined with enormous stone statues, heads carved larger than a grown man is tall, seated in eternal rows facing the rising and setting sun. And according to the legend that still surrounds this place, the man who built it may have paid for his ambition with a curse that outlasted his entire kingdom. The site was constructed under King Antiochus I of Commagene, ruler of a small but genuinely powerful kingdom that emerged from the breakup of the Seleucid Empire and controlled a strategic stretch of territory between the Roman and Parthian worlds in the 1st century BC. Commagene sat at a genuine cultural crossroads, and Antiochus built his entire religious identity around that position, deliberately fusing Greek and Persian tradition into single composite deities, rather than choosing one pantheon over the other. Zeus was merged with the Persian sky god Oromasdes, Apollo blended with Mithras and the sun god Helios, Heracles combined with the Persian war god Artanias. Antiochus commissioned enormous seated statues of these fused gods, arranged in a row atop his mountain sanctuary, alongside a goddess of fortune representing Commagene itself. And seated among them at the same scale in the same row facing the same sunrise, he placed a statue of himself. This is where the legend begins. Antiochus, the story goes, was not content to simply honor the gods. He wanted to sit among them, as an equal, carved in the same stone, at the same height, for all of history to see. He wanted proof, permanent and undeniable, that a mortal king could belong beside immortals. According to the tale told by generations of visitors and locals in the region, the gods did not forgive that kind of pride. They are said to have cursed Antiochus for his arrogance, refusing to let a mere man claim a seat among them without consequence, no matter how carefully his sculptors had matched his stone likeness to theirs. Behind the row of seated gods rises the mountain's other great mystery, a massive artificial mound of crushed rock nearly 50 meters high, believed to cover the actual tomb of Antiochus himself. Despite more than a century of study, drilling, and exploration, archaeologists have never located the burial chamber inside it. The loose, deliberately unstable rock makes tunneling extremely dangerous, and the king who built an entire mountaintop sanctuary to declare his own immortality has, so far, kept the one thing that would prove his mortality completely hidden from the modern world that came looking for it. The site itself vanished from wider knowledge for centuries, known only to local shepherds, until a German engineer named Karl Sester came across it in 1881 while surveying transportation routes for the Ottoman state, and brought word of the monumental statues back to European scholars for the first time. It would be more than a century later, in 1987, before UNESCO formally recognized the site as a World Heritage location, cementing its place among the ancient world's most significant surviving monuments. Today, nearly every statue on the mountain, and this is where the story finds its physical proof, sits without its head. The massive carved heads, weighing tons, lie scattered on the ground below their own bodies, separated by something that has never been definitively explained. Archaeologists point to erosion, earthquakes common to this seismically active stretch of Anatolia, or possibly deliberate destruction carried out by later invaders or iconoclasts hostile to the site's pagan imagery, as the most likely causes. But for the people who tell the older version of the story, the sight of King Antiochus's own head lying broken in the dirt, staring up at the sky rather than out toward the sunrise it was built to greet, needs no scientific explanation at all. Visitors who climb Mount Nemrut before dawn, timing their arrival to watch the sunrise strike the ancient stone faces exactly as it was designed to almost 2,000 years ago, describe the sight of those fallen heads, scattered below their thrones on both the east and west terraces, as unforgettable, less like ordinary ruins and more like a warning deliberately left in stone for whoever climbed high enough to find it. A king who wanted to sit with gods, and gods who, according to the story that has followed this mountain across the centuries, made certain the whole world climbing up to look would know exactly how that ended. Mount Hasan, the Saint WHO, proved his own lesson wrong. Aksaray, Turkey. In the heart of Central Anatolia, in the province of Aksaray, an extinct volcano rises high enough to hold snow on its upper slopes for much of the year. Locals call it Hasan Dagi, Mount Hasan, and the story behind that name is less about the mountain itself than about a lesson its namesake taught, and then, in a single unguarded moment, appeared to unlearn. Long before that legend took shape, this same mountain may already have made history in an entirely different way. At Catalhoyuk, one of the world's oldest known settlements, roughly 50 kilometers away, archaeologists uncovered a wall painting dated to around 6600 BC that some researchers interpret as a landscape view of the settlement itself, with a twin-peaked mountain erupting in the background, a mountain many of those same researchers believe to be Hasan Dagi. The interpretation remains debated. Some scholars read the image as an abstract geometric pattern rather than any literal map or eruption scene, but if the landscape reading holds, it would rank among the oldest surviving depictions of a specific, identifiable place anywhere in the history of human art, painted by people who may have watched this very volcano erupt with their own eyes. Mount Hasan sits within the wider volcanic landscape of Cappadocia, and its eruptions, alongside those of nearby Mount Erciyes, are what built the region's famous terrain in the first place. Layer after layer of volcanic ash, compressed over millions of years into the soft, tough rock that wind and water later carved into Cappadocia's cone-shaped fairy chimneys and underground cities, all trace back to mountains like this one. The volcano that a local legend accuses of witnessing a saint's single moment of distraction is, geologically speaking, the same volcano responsible for one of the most distinctive landscapes anywhere in the world. According to local legend, a wise and holy man named Hasan Dede lived alone on the mountain, a life of solitude and devotion far from the noise of any town. His closest friend was a dervish named Ali Baba who lived down in Aksaray and worked at one of the city's public bathhouses. Despite the distance between a mountain summit and a city bath, the two men maintained a friendship built on mutual respect and, as the story tells it, a fondness for proving spiritual mastery through quiet demonstration rather than words. One day, Ali Baba climbed the mountain to visit his friend, carrying with him a handful of burning coals wrapped inside an ordinary handkerchief. As the two men sat and talked, the coals burned steadily inside the cloth, and yet the handkerchief itself remained completely untouched, not so much as scorched. Some time later, Hasan Dede returned the visit, traveling down to Aksaray to see Ali Baba at the bathhouse. He arrived carrying a handful of snow gathered from his mountain, wrapped in his own handkerchief. As the two friends settled into a long conversation inside the warm, steam-filled bath, the snow inside the cloth did not melt. Not a drop, despite the heat surrounding it. It was, by every measure, a fair display of matched spiritual discipline. Two holy men, each demonstrating a mastery over the physical world that ordinary faith could not explain. And then, in a single instant, everything changed. As women began leaving the bath, Hasan Dede's attention drifted toward them. In that brief moment of distraction, the snow inside his handkerchief began to melt. Ali Baba, watching this happen, did not gloat. He offered his friend a single observation that has outlived both of their names individually. True saintliness, he said, is not a skill you perform on a mountaintop. It is a state you carry with you everywhere, including into a room full of ordinary temptation. Hasan Dede, by most tellings, accepted the lesson without argument. When he died, he asked to be buried at the very summit of the mountain where he had spent his life in solitude, and his wish was honored. His grave still sits on the western ridge of the volcano's crater today, marked and surrounded by stones, and the mountain has carried his name ever since. Stories built around two holy men matching each other's miracles appear throughout Anatolian dervish tradition, a recurring shape used to compare spiritual teachers across the region's long history of wandering saints. What sets this one apart is the ending. Most versions of this genre let both men walk away undefeated. This one insists on a loser, the one who had already proven himself worthy of the mountain that now carries his name. It is, in the end, an unusual kind of legend, not a story of a saint's triumph, but of his very human failure, preserved and retold for centuries because of exactly how honest it is about what humility actually costs. The Weeping Rock of Niobe, a mother, WHO, never stopped crying, Manisa, Turkey. On the slopes of Mount Sipylus, overlooking Manisa in western Turkey, there is a rock formation that has been weeping, according to legend, for roughly 3,000 years. Ancient travelers wrote about it. Poets built works around it, and to this day water still seeps from the stone, running down the same weathered face that Greek mythology insists belongs to a mother who lost everything because of a single boast. Her name was Niobe, Queen of Thebes, and by every account she had reason for pride. She was blessed, depending on which ancient source you read, with either 7 or 14 children, a family so large and so celebrated that she made the fatal mistake of comparing her own fortune to that of a goddess. Niobe's story did not begin with her own pride. It began with her father Tantalus, king of the very mountain that would later bear her grief. Tantalus dined at the table of the gods and betrayed that trust so badly that he was punished with an eternity of thirst and hunger just out of reach, the origin of the word tantalize itself. Niobe, it seems, inherited more than a kingdom from her father. She inherited his belief that mortal greatness could stand level with the divine. Leto, the mother of the twin gods Apollo and Artemis, had only 2 children. Niobe, in front of witnesses, declared that this made her the greater mother, more blessed by fortune, more deserving of reverence than a goddess who could only manage a pair of children where Niobe had raised so many. The gods of Greek mythology were rarely forgiving of mortals who compared themselves favorably to immortals, and Leto was no exception. She sent her 2 children to answer the insult directly. Apollo, god of the sun and of the arrow, and Artemis, goddess of the hunt, descended and killed every one of Niobe's children in front of her, one by one, leaving her with nothing left to boast about at all. The story captivated the ancient world so completely that both Aeschylus and Sophocles wrote tragedies titled simply Niobe, though only fragments survive today, and Roman sculptors later carved an entire marble group of Niobe shielding her children from Apollo's arrows, still displayed today in Florence's Uffizi Gallery. Homer referenced the myth in the Iliad, having Achilles recount it to grieving King Priam as proof that even a mother who lost 12 children in a day eventually remembered to eat, to sleep, to keep living inside her grief. Niobe's grief, according to the myth, was so total, so complete, that it transformed her. Zeus himself, taking pity on what remained of her, turned her to stone, rather than leave her to suffer as a living woman. But even as stone, her sorrow did not end. The rock she became was said to weep continuously, her tears flowing eternally down the mountainside as water, a mother frozen mid-grief for all of time. The ancient Greek writer Homer described this exact weeping rock on Mount Sipylus, near what was then the region of Lydia, close to modern Manisa. Later travelers throughout antiquity made a point of visiting it, describing the same phenomenon Homer had, water running down a rock face shaped, if you looked at it the right way, like a grieving woman's form. Lydia was no minor backdrop for a myth. This was the region that later produced King Croesus, whose name became a byword for wealth, and the soil credited with some of the earliest coinage in the ancient world. A myth this old, anchored to Lydian ground rather than Thebes, says something about how seriously the ancients treated the rock as evidence. Some archaeologists studying the formation raise a different possibility, that the carved face on the mountainside may predate the Niobe myth altogether, originally representing Cybele, the Anatolian mother goddess, worshipped here long before Greek settlers arrived and reinterpreted an already ancient relief through their own mythology. If correct, the Weeping Rock carries not one layered identity but two. The formation is still known locally as Aglayan Kaya, the Weeping Rock, within Spildagi National Park, one of Turkey's very first national parks. Hikers climbing toward it still pause where ancient travelers once stood, tracing a woman's silhouette in the weathered limestone, watching for dark streaks of mineral water running down the stone like tears that never finished falling. The natural explanation is straightforward: mineral-rich water seeping through porous limestone, a geological process with nothing supernatural about it. But the myth attached to it is old enough, and specific enough, that this Weeping Rock is one of the very few ancient legends in the world where a real physical location has been continuously matched to the exact same myth for roughly 3,000 years, without the story ever fully letting go of the stone, the same way Niobe herself was never able to let go of her grief